Well, thank you, everybody. I think we'll get started. I wanted to say good morning, good afternoon, and good night. We've got all the time zones with us. I'm Abby Press, the global lead of business affairs at Uber and a lifelong musician. Just to set up some background, I grew up underneath a 100-year-old Knabe grand piano at home. My dad practiced Bach for hours and accompanied my mom singing Gershwin torch songs. I'd crawl underneath and feel vibrations through the floor, watching his feet dance across the pedals. That was my first education in music, not in the notes or the theory, but how mechanisms become music and sound becomes feeling. Music was my first language, and no matter what technology brings us, it will always be the universal language of being human. How we process joy, grief, connection. AI can mimic the sounds, but it can't replace what music actually is, our shared emotional DNA. Fast forward to making my own music, I'll be honest, I learned about performing rights organizations and how to operate a DSP way later than I should have. Why? Because, like most artists, I barely had time to create, and when I did, I focused on the art. The business side was homework for someday or when I make it. The irony isn't lost on me. Business affairs by day, someone who lives in the fine print of contracts, yet I'd rather create than protect my own music. But here's what I've learned from straddling both worlds for 15 years. Artists sign away rights they don't understand. They chase going viral over royalties. The permission layer of creativity has always been critical. It just has never gotten enough of a spotlight. Most artists spend their time creating, not keeping up with legislation. And now AI is accelerating everything. We're at an inflection point. AI created tracks and artists are creating, charting on Billboard. Major labels are signing synthetic artists and making deals with AI companies. Brands are commissioning tracks that sound human but have no human to pay. Can we design systems that make attribution and payment automatic or agentic so creators spend more time creating and less time chasing their rights? That's why we're here. Not because we have all the answers, but to build the permission layer together. And I've invited a few of the architects doing the work to lead us. Daouda Leonard, who pioneered consent-based Gen AI voice licensing. Dave Bogan, whose metadata systems make attribution possible. Mark Rucker, ensuring creators get paid and understand their rights. And Tushar Apte, navigating these waters as a musician, composer, and consultant. Before we begin, I want to mention that this session is part of the Double Helix, my platform on creativity and compliance. I publish weekly insights and frameworks on Substack. Today's conversation will become a practical resource for everyone. So let's dive in. Lightning round first. Tell us who you are, and in one sentence, what does a permission layer mean to you? Mark, let's get started with you.
Well, hi, thank you for that. And that's a great place to start. My name is Mark Rucker. I'm based out of Nashville, Tennessee. I'm on the Sound Exchange Artist Industry Relations team. And I guess a permission layer to me is something we talk about a lot is the three C's, and the idea that the permission layer allows the framework for consent, credit, and eventually compensation. And so ultimately that's my thought on what a permission layer is. But thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
Day.
I'm Dave Bogan. I'm the head of third-party partnerships at the MLC. I'm also just someone who's been in the music tech and metadata space for about 15 years. For me, the commission layer is really a consensus among stakeholders that reflects the economics of the music industry, but in code. That's effectively how I see it.
Daouda.
Good morning. My name is Daouda Leonard. I'm the co-founder of CreateSafe. We are a artist management and tech enabled services company for managers, record labels, rights holders. We build tools to meet the emerging needs of today's digital landscape. I don't think I have an opinion about what the permission layer is because I don't even know if one exists. I guess there's a mythical one beginning to happen. The best way to put it, the permission layer is a bunch of humans deciding what's possible, while another bunch of humans are just saying everything's possible.
My name's Tushar. I'm a producer and composer and songwriter. I'm signed to Warner Chappell out here in Los Angeles and have been working in music and technology for about 10 years. And more recently, I've been involved in the consulting side of a number of AI startups, everything from audio watermarking to generative music models. And I think the permission layer in theory is the gate to the wonders of human art via copyright, and it's worth protecting and worth upholding in the way it is, because it's really the foundation of so much in our society.
Great. Thank you all so much for being here. We'll get started in our first section of discussion, the creator control stack. Daouda, I wanted to start with you. As a spiritual technologist who bridges wisdom and innovation, you helped Grimes, one of the biggest artists of our time, create one of the most radical experiments in creative permission, open sourcing her voice through Elf Tech. Technically, it was groundbreaking, especially for digital music permission frameworks, but she recently admitted she didn't like what people made and pulled back a little bit. I just wanted to know what your philosophy is on the difference between giving permission and maintaining creative control, and what you think, how we could build systems that are both open and artistically meaningful.
When in 2023, I guess, when there was this moment in time where we were introduced to the idea that like people were going to start creating music under other people's likenesses. Like deepfakes had already existed for a number of years, but they like in terms of like image or video deepfakes. But for music, it was the first time that people started to experience that, which was with this artist ghostwriter making a record that featured Drake and The Weeknd. And our response as a company and also as an artist representing Grimes was, well, yeah, let's lean in to this emerging technology. Let's break the seal on something that's inevitable. So that was I think the purpose was twofold. One was to see if people want to have this experience, like what type of experience are people looking for when it comes to making music or engaging with music in the age of AI. The way in which we didn't build the app in a way that was like a consumer product that was like everyone can now put their voice up and start like letting people use their voice or their sounds or things like that. We built it more like a game where it was more about like the story around Grimes, and there was all these other elements to it that played into her now album cycle right now. And then there was the philosophical side of it, which was what happens when you allow people to do this? What are the moral and ethical concerns that you have to deal with? What are the creative concerns that you have to deal with? And now, 2+ years later, when I speak to Grimes, well, recently we spoke about it, and her opinion, right? It's not that she was like mad or take that application down, or even right now she's saying, "Hey, I don't want anyone to use my IP," because she still very much believes in like an open source ethos around copyright, because she's just like everyone else. Like people who don't know the law, like you don't just start sampling music because the copyright is available to you or someone explained it. You do it because you like it, you hear it, you want to have fun, you want to express yourself, and using what's available to you in the world. So her opinion right now is more so, hey, I didn't actually enjoy what I was hearing. Like there was maybe like a couple of moments where she was like, "Oh, that sounds cool," and she actually started collaborating with a number of the people who were almost like forming a group or a fellowship of people who were creating using her voice. And I think that she enjoyed that aspect of it, this sort of co-collaborative space, this opportunity to find new talent and things like that. But people were sent in just sometimes we would get like songs that were just people like making sounds. Sometimes we would get songs where people are talking about topics that maybe were not of interest to any of us. So it's you are the human being that's on the other end of that, similar to the way social media feels. You have to have a really thick skin to go through the process of being digitally free like that. Like recently she did a podcast, Doom Scroll with Josh Citarella, where she talks about being digitally free now and how that she had to go through the dark night of the soul. And now she's come out on the other end and feels much stronger as a human being, knowing that whatever leaks, whether it's her text, whether it's someone using her voice, she's not concerned about that. That you have to graduate to a sort of like higher level of consciousness. Not saying that she's some ultra conscious being, but like every one of us as a human will have to do that at some point in time if you are going to deal with people just using you, using your words, your image, etc., in any way possible. And that's what we are up against right now. We're not up against a situation where the majority of the people who are building these platforms care or want to approach it with that level of care. They're just like, let's fuck around and find out. And so Grimes did, and she found out she didn't really like it that much, but she moved past it a little bit.
It's almost the final boss of all press is good press, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just on a
It
insane scale.
totally is the final boss. It's one of the final bosses.
One of them, yeah.
And Grimes is the exact person to take on that final boss, that's for sure. I think it takes a lot of bravery to really give yourself to the digital world for sure, but people in that way and like
She's
reinvent.
unforgiving. The digital realm is unforgiving.
Yeah. Yeah, it's scary. Are there any other, like for anybody else, I'm sure, there's times that the tech has been scary and everyone around you is saying don't do it, but you've leaned in. Does anybody want to talk about a moment like that?
I think we're in a very sensitive space in the creative community, just amongst the songwriter and producer world. We're still in that place where people are not openly talking about using a lot of tools in the way that they are being used behind closed doors. It's just quite an interesting dichotomy to see, because online there's obviously a lot of it fight the power against the tech bro language, and then when you're in sessions everybody's got Suno open in the rooms now, so we're just at a really interesting tipping point in it from the creative side at the absolute highest levels.
I want to add to that. I think it's interesting putting aside the deep fakes or the generative AI using someone's name, image, or likeness, but rather AI as a tool. We saw this with auto-tune was coming out. There's producers or singers not admitting to using auto-tune until there was enough adoption, or until the general music listener became smarter in hearing when auto-tune was actually used. So I think this is an example of that. Again, not talking about the deep fake use of AI, but rather just the tools on the back end side, even if it's something around music production, that I think consumers right now are more tolerant of AI being used in music production than it is being used in generative vocal production. And I'm in a lot of rooms, just on Facebook alone, there's tons of Facebook groups about foot songwriters. One of them I'm in, there's over 80,000 songwriters. And the most interesting, and I've been in panels about AI in different countries and webinars about AI, and we read all the blogs of our colleagues in the music industry. But I think the most interesting conversations I've been seeing in this space is not necessarily music industry professionals like us or investors or platform owners. It's really specific to the generative use of AI for voice, is lyricists versus songwriters. And in this one group I'm in, this lyricist made a post and she was explaining why she's using generative AI because she has spent $75,000 investing in a home recording studio. She's endlessly tried to work with human singers and has had projects come to a screeching halt because of their schedules or their inability to deliver based on what they agreed to, or the rising cost of demo singers to just hear what her ideas are, right? So all of these problems as a lyricist that she explained, she said, look, I need to recoup my investment. I spent $75,000 in a studio, and I'm not going to feel attacked because you think I'm ethically or morally wrong to use Suno to interpret my lyrics so that I can hear what it sounds like rather than waiting for a singer that may not have the style that I want or the vocal range that I need or the time that I need. And that was her sort of post. And then the comments just blew up because all these songwriters and all these singers who are just like, no, this is wrong. I don't care how much it costs you. You need to use singers and this is going to destroy us. And then someone else chimed in, another lyricist, say, hey, look, I agree with her. I'm a mom. I also have a small business. I also have lupus. I also have this. And I'm trying to also, should I quit my career as being a lyricist? Should I quit my dream of being a songwriter because I cannot sing? I love now that I can now lean into my passion of being a songwriter by using something like a Suno or audio, things like that. So that is the most interesting conversation I've been seeing because as sort of technologists and investors and the marketers and managers and agents and lawyers, we can talk about the business, but the soul, as Daouda mentioned, or Abby, you mentioned, kind of the soul of the music come from these two categories, songwriters and singers. And of course, musicians as well in terms of interpreting musical arrangements. But I'm seeing this conflict in these Facebook groups between two parties that have been dependent on each other forever. Singers who cannot write lyrics need lyricists who cannot sing, need singers. And now you have this wedge between these two classes of low paid and often disrespected within the ecosystem of the music industry are now facing off at lyricists. Some lyricists see this as an opportunity to lean into their passion, and then songwriters see this as a threat to hinder their careers. The most interesting conversation I've just been watching as a spectator, even though I have knowledge on other aspects of this conversation. That's been a really interesting thing because at the end of the day, the permission layer is going to include the lyricist who has a copyright in the lyrics and who actually wrote the song. And if they're saying, hey, I'm okay to get permission because I believe in this technology, it's now making my career possible, I think that's going to be an interesting thing to watch.
I want to move into arts education and rights infrastructure. Mark, Sound Exchange is set to launch a global AI sound recording registry where artists can opt out of AI training. We've seen a lot of opt-in, opt-out frameworks, including an opt-out framework by OpenAI themselves, who launched Sora 2 and put the responsibility of IP rights holders, put the responsibility of opting out on IP holders rather than themselves. So in Sound Exchange's case, you're obviously on the side of artists to provide them with more autonomy and control, but where do you see this opt-out framework for rights management going? Because we used to live in a world where rights were assumed before taken. Are we entering a world where we should assume our rights are used before we put up our own guardrails to protect it?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I guess I would start with, I think we're all realizing we're in a world and a time that we probably shouldn't assume anything. I think we're all wondering a lot about the future in a general sense. And I think part of this is really about giving creators and rights owners the chance to indicate whether they would like to be in or out of the training of a model, right? Where you can say yes or no. And it goes back to that initial framework that I mentioned of the consent, right? Do you have consent? Do you have a ethically trained model? And right now, we don't even really have the frameworks for them to be able to make that decision. And I think that's where we're seeing these tools are just continually just making the assumption that they can just use it until they're told otherwise. But by that point, it might be too late. I think back to the time when, when digital music was happening, or even when social media started, there was all these assumptions that happened. And then we look backwards and we're like, man, I wish we would have caught it sooner. And so I actually feel like giving creators and rights owners more of that autonomy and control can actually lead us to that permission layer where they can say, I want this used or I don't, based off of the potential license, potential credit, potential compensation that comes with it. And then ultimately they're more in control of their careers than they currently are. And so that's ultimately what it comes back to.
I just want to follow to that. We've seen the opt-out in different forms over the decades in the internet era, and often it's smaller creators, smaller rights holders that lose in these scenarios because an opt-out is effectively like a pseudo license until some music users and technology company is identified to have been using. With the DMCA, for example, there's been a lot of criticism around the safe harbor that the Digital Millennium Copyright Act provides to websites, internet services for decades, right? Back when I represented songwriters, there weren't even tools to identify where your song was being used. So how could you even go through the process of, at the time, of submitting a takedown notice when it was impossible to know all the thousands of places where your music could end up? So shifting the onus onto a creator or a small rights holder that, oh, you need to opt out. And it sounds good when you think of one company or two big companies, but when it becomes 100 companies or 1,000 companies, and now you need to go and opt out of all of them, that shifts the onus and it almost creates a license effect for the users until they're discovered. Then it creates this whole new ecosystem that has to be created, which is policing copyrights, which we have seen in various types of automated copyright recognition and content IDs and all that kind of stuff. We've seen that for years. We know that it has not been effective, which is why there's been lawsuits over decades by small, medium, and large size rights holders. And we have to do something better because the scale of this use and the speed at which the content can be transformed and the way in which we can disappear the original content, and it's difficult to track down the original content. It's much more difficult. So the idea of an opt-out, I'm not sure if that is or is not the best approach, but we have examples of opt-outs in the past, and there's been lots of money lost, lots of money left on the table, lots of companies that skirt tail responsibility and licensing because of opt-outs.
So is there a layer where you think the opt-outs should be opt-in or opt-out should be happening if it's not at an individual level? Does it happen? Should it be happening at a publisher level or at the MLC level or?
From my opinion, and I'm not speaking on behalf of MLC because we're not involved. The MLC as an organization is not involved in this. I'm just speaking from my own knowledge and experience. But in my experience, I think that there has to be a different approach. It may include an opt-out on an individual company basis, but that needs to be like a secondary as opposed to the primary, right? The primary use of opt-out in the DMCA created a safe harbor system in which various types of companies were able to pop up, leverage APIs, utilize content, didn't get public performance licenses, were able to acquire user bases, raise money, all before our artists or rights holder even knew their music was used. I was in this space as a consultant for a long time, working with startups doing this work and trying to navigate them into the right way, as opposed to the Wild West way. So what I'm saying is we've already seen an example of this with the Digital Millennium Copyright Act of 1998. So it's been almost 27 years. So it's been 27 years worth of history of a opt-out safe harbor, and we have decades and decades of case law that reflects the outcome. So when we're looking at when the industry is looking at is opt-out the only way, I think there has to be something more creative and also, again, reflective of the challenge of today, which is totally different than a couple of different big websites having your music versus now tens of thousands of derivative artists using your content, which you cannot track down. And once it's out there, how do you get it back? You can't take down every one of them. So it's a different situation.
Yeah, in my own community, anytime that a company, like even the DSPs, change their terms and conditions to include that it can be trained using AI training, there's an uproar and also just a feeling of helplessness. Because for small artists, it's like one of your only outlets is something like Spotify. A lot of people are leaving, but it's still one of the places that people find and discover music. So it's just such a difficult burden to put on artists that now they have to opt out of something that is like the infrastructure that everyone else is operating on. But we're seeing AI tools that can generate infinite variations of songs and distribute everything everywhere all at once. And I'm wondering how you guys think AI could be used to make it easier for everyone. Like maybe AI can be that part of this permission level layer. Um, but then like in that future, how much do creators need to even understand that system?
I guess I would say that I think I work with creators every day, I work with managers every day. I think there's a lot of this that it feels complex to the creators and it feels like they spend more time managing their business than creating, or there's times like that. I do think there's opportunities that we're going to have utilizing tools that utilize AI to help manage metadata better, to manage copyrights, manage your registrations, your claims. All those things are hopefully going to get a lot easier, a lot more straightforward. But yeah, to the extent of will they understand it, it's really come down to like the human level, right? Because I think, do people understand how their phones work, or they just understand that their phone works? I think there's part of me that wants to believe that they would, but also totally understand why they wouldn't. But that's why people like companies like ours and the ones at the MLC, we exist to help these creators and educate them. And we have educational webinars and tools and videos and all types of different things. And we do advocacy on their behalf for those reasons. But I would probably be naive to think that they would completely understand it, because I'm guilty of that in so many areas of my life too, right? If something's being handled for me. So yeah, hopeful on a lot of the AI tools helping creators, but also understanding that anything that you over index on can be a bad thing. So
Mhm.
hopefully it's not completely relied upon, but also utilized in a proper way.
I
Yeah.
I think that not it's not often talked about how there are like there's the professional mainstream music industry, and then there is the aspiring or weekend warrior style music industry. And sometimes like people get confused like whose problems are what. And a lot is talked about being an independent art and all these things, but there's a reason why record labels exist. There's a reason why publishers exist. There's a reason why the MLC, Sound Exchange, all these, what I would call like all these organizations to me actually exist for like the professional music industry. And that's where a lot of times like managers and artists have to engage with these organizations to provide them with a service. That's what the music industry is. And then there's the world where like people are just like, oh, I want to put up songs, hopefully make some money and have a career. They're not trying to follow any paths that exist. They're saying, hey, I just want to be independent. And I think it's important to recognize that that's very similar to the athletic world in a lot of ways, where there are professional teams that entertain the world, superstar athletes, and then there are people who enjoy having fun and maybe making a little bit of money. And those people maybe are going to have to deal with the issues that we're talking about around opt-ins and opt-outs and like thousands of songs being uploaded and how that affects them. Um, and I think those are just two separate issues, and maybe at some point in time they converge. I think there needs to be like a moment where people decide which part of that industry are they fighting for or focused on. And sometimes people are not necessarily clear on what aspect of the industry that they're focused on innovating or working in.
Yeah, I just want to jump in real fast because I totally agree with you. I think there are differing parts of different careers, right? But with social media driving so much music now, that it's so much faster than being an athlete in college going to the pros. The money moves so much faster. So it is important, even if you're not making money in music yet, to understand what are the mechanisms that currently work. Now, does that mean in 5 years those are still going to be there, and how are those going to work in the future? We'll continue to iterate on those. But I do think that's one thing that a lot of artists don't come to me, or probably today, until they think they've had money. And I'm like, yeah, but now you're 3 years behind and you might have missed something. And I think there's an opportunity for a lot of creators to learn the industry ahead of time. And a mentor of mine used to say, money is just a byproduct of knowing your industry. So do you want to be a musician, or is it, he used to say, this isn't a hobby, right? We're not doing this
Yeah.
for fun. We're trying to get out there and really make something happen and really enjoy it. But I'm not on the creator side. I understand that there's different connotations on that side. But yeah, I think it is important because you never know. One year you could be in your bedroom making songs on a TikTok, and then the next year you could be playing the Grammy stage, not knowing if you're getting paid your royalties or not. That legit happens. And I think that's the difference in music maybe versus sports, just the speed that it can happen.
Yeah, no, I would add that going back to the sports metaphor, I'm not like simping for the music industry here, but I think that the strength and the integrity of the professional industry, it does filter down into that weekend warrior mode in the same way that a professional sporting league would.
Yeah, I would agree with that. That's what I was going to say too, is that there are obviously two different conversations happening, and I agree with Dowdy there. But I think that because those major labels and that big industry with all the money has big lawyers and ways to make change at a very high level, that does, to Tushar's point, filter down. And we saw that with the streaming revolution. They were upset because they were losing all their money in Napster and LimeWire, whatever. And they made change happen because they had to, and they had the tools to do it.
I wanted to go back to the question as you framed it, Abby, because it made me think about just some of the different technological innovations that have been permeating for a decade now, or at least 10 years now. 8 years ago, 7 years ago, I think 9 or 8 years ago, I had been teaching a class at the UCLA Center for Music Innovation. And the purpose of the class was for students to conceptualize music tech startups and to identify the technologies that would be used in these startups, and then to do roadmaps and pitches and so forth. So it was a whole startup class. And a lot of my students, which actually surprised me, and this is 2016, and these were 19, 20, and 21-year-olds. Some of their startup ideas have included AI and blockchain. And this is 2016. Now, outside of academia, I worked with a number of startups and accelerators. So I knew that there were accelerators that were building blockchain-based and AI-driven tools and platforms to address the digital media industries, including tech music. But a lot of them were just sandboxes. They had not scaled anywhere yet. And in 2018, I put together a lecture called Music 2020, the next era of innovation in the music industry, and presented this next lecture at a few different universities in California, and then eventually at Music Biz in 2019 with Scott Cohen, who at the time was at Warner, Chief Innovation Officer. And basically, we presented, here are the technologies that I believe in 2020 will begin to emerge and evolve and scale throughout the 20s. And that included cryptocurrency, tokenization, mixed reality, augmented reality, virtual reality, artificial intelligence, and blockchain. So those were basically, I laid out, here are the technologies, here's an example of a startup at different accelerators across the country that are working on these startups, and here's why I think it's going to scale. That was in 2018. Now we're 7 years later. One of the missing parts that I think has not yet scaled is the connection between AI and blockchain, specifically around rights management. Now, I see tons of rights management platforms that use blockchain in my role at MLC. Yeah, I'm in probably 3 or 5 meetings this week alone with startup founders. There's lots of technology companies building rights management on blockchain. That's been happening for a long time. But there's still this gap between what's happening in AI and what's happening in rights management and blockchain. And I think once someone figures out how to connect that or bring that gap, close that gap, there's a concept that I hope I coined this term, because I like the term, but I may have didn't coin it. But 2 years ago, I was meeting with the music infra team, and I had said at Music Tectonics, this concept of infinite licensing. Abby, you mentioned infinite before. infinite licensing is going to be the way in which music needs to be licensed in the AI era. That infinite licensing, we saw its baby version when we talked about smart contracts and blockchain, but smart contracts are still limited. The concept of infinite licensing that I'm conjuring in my mind has to do with this real-time licensing negotiation that's happening outside of the limitations of a smart contract, which is predetermined. And that is where the AI and blockchain, when it comes together, we're going to get to this point where the permission layer should include this concept of infinite licensing, being able to turn out copyrightable within the scope and the framework of the country in which those copyrights exist, because every country has different copyright standards for material that includes AI, licensable within companies, monetizable through PROs like ASCAP, BMI, and SOCAN just announced their acceptance of AI, partially AI created music. So once all these institutions announce their frameworks, right? The US government between 2023, the United States Copyright Office put out its guidance on copyrightable works that includes AI material. So that's guidance on the copyright. You have guidance now from ASCAP, BMI, SOCAN. You have guidance coming in from other countries. Once all that guidance sets the tone, this infinite licensing concept is going to need no human involvement. It's going to look at the source material. It's going to look at market value. It's going to look at all these different resources and inputs that we don't even currently think about. And it's going to go beyond what smart contracts have ever done. And I think the company that gets that right and gets it right fast is going to be the one that the major rights holders respect, because they'll be able to work with them to shape value, whereas they didn't quite shape value in the 1990s with the downloads and going into the download world, right? The technology shaped the value first. The rights holders caught up later, and we've been suffering ever since. So that's my 2 piece on that.
So are you saying that most humans are eventually just going to abdicate control over to AI to set the value
That was
of
literally
rights?
my question. Yeah.
No, I think there's gonna be a combination, just like there is today. For example, a songwriter cannot tell you how much royalties you can get for a public performance. It's a statutory rate, right? So there's gonna be a combination of, but I can tell you how much you get for a sync because it's controlled by the individual. There are certain rights that are statutory and or compulsory. There are certain royalties that are statutory. There are certain that are direct. Even within the mechanical space, at the MLC, we administer a compulsory license, a blanket license with the rates set by the Copyright Royalty Board. But if you were to do a direct mechanical license, then you get to set the rate, which would be above or more than or less than the government rate. So I think it's going to be a combination. But from a technology standpoint, it's just going to be a combination. There may be layers of it. The layer doesn't have to be one layer, right? It can be 3 layers. It can be 4 layers. The idea is that somewhere in that layer, there's going to be automation. Right now, we have catalog music. Whenever you go to license something, when I used to work with startups and I would go to a major label or a major independent to license music for the startup, they never gave us the Rihannas and the Beyoncés. They gave us the catalog music first. Okay, you can test your concept with the catalog music. We're not going to get any more value out of this than we already have. It has set the tone. We're looking for derivative or incremental income, not derivative, but incremental income. And we don't necessarily need to be involved in the licensing in the same way that we need to be involved with a major commercial artist. Independent artists currently opt in to various pools to have their music licensed to background music services, restaurants, things like that. They don't negotiate the licenses. They just, okay, make it available, and whatever I get from it, I get from it. So it's going to be a combination. But the concept of infinite licensing, again, I'm trying to coin this term, but the concept of infinite licensing is the combination of blockchain and AI, where AI uses its own the LLM learning concept of AI is going to learn pricing models. It's going to learn value discrepancies. It's going to learn all these things about licensing. The same way you go to a label, or when I owned a publishing company, when I talked to a music supervisor and they wanted to license a piece of one of my band's music for an MTV reality show, we had standards. You kind of look at how you're going to use it. Is it US or is it distributed around the world? Is it going to go OTT? There are standards. And then we spit out, I gave a thing and they came back and countered it. There's no reason that AI can't learn how to do that. So when you mesh that process of learning how to license music with the immutable state of blockchain for rights management to see real permissions, to control those permissions, to have everyone see those rights. That combination is what's going to create infinite licensing. And I do think that you can opt, and this goes back to the opt-out part. Let me opt out a portion of the catalog from infinite licensing, but the rest of it can be an infinite licensing. And we see examples of that right now in our analog version of licensing, and we call that statutory royalties and compulsory licenses. Individuals cannot control those licenses nor those royalty rates. So effectively, AI and blockchain would do a version of that, but in a commercial for-profit space where rights holders can contribute to a negotiation of a minimum royalty. So anyways, I can go
I
higher
asked
on this
that
concept.
question. The reason why I asked it in that way was more twofold. One is that at some point in time, there are going to be organizations like yourself or major that are always going to set the tone and the pricing for music. And I think I'm pointing that out because during my time experimenting with blockchain and AI and all that stuff, people say that they want to change how the music business works, but then when it comes to being like, how much should you charge? Most people don't want to actually say what they want to charge, or they don't even know how to. And I think that's maybe a situation that is dealing with like people's understanding of finances in general. But I think the majority of people just want money to show up for them, especially people who are doing the weekend warrior thing. The second thing I would say is I would like anybody who's listening and everyone on this panel is that a version of what you're talking about exists today with Apple Music. They have a product in Apple Music called DJ Mixes. And the way DJ Mixes work is that anybody who's approved to create a DJ mix and upload it to Apple Music essentially can use almost pretty much all music available that's on Apple Music. There's probably about 60 artists worldwide who have opted out of having their music used in this way. But essentially, I could go and create a album essentially that on in each track ID, I could be playing 5 different master recordings within that track ID, and then do that across 10, 15 track IDs, right? Which is essentially sampling music and making what I want to make. And what happens through Apple's technology is that every master rights holder gets paid a royalty bearing stream. And subsequently, because it's on streaming, so does all of the writers essentially get some kind of prorated royalty bearing stream. The fact that is not a de facto standard technology that exists across every streaming platform blows my mind. It obviously exists because Apple is deciding to pay um, royalties that they're not obligated to pay, but they created a framework. The last thing I'll note is that if you are the DJ or producer putting together that mix, you get paid a royalty bearing stream. Also, if you are let's call it the supplier, and in Apple's, the way they see it, suppliers are technically like clubs, live music festivals, etc. There's a reason, we're not going to get into it. There's a reason why this whole program was developed in that way. But they're paying multiple royalty bearing streams to people that they don't technically have to pay, but they created a solution that rewards what they call money on the dance floor, because the DJ mixes program exists for people who make music for the party culture to exist on Apple Music. That's a beautiful thing, right? The fact that isn't like an industry, they are a de facto, like Apple Music, there's no music industry if Apple didn't exist for the past 20 years. And so they've already set the tone for infinite licensing to exist. Um, so I'm confused sometimes why some of these things don't trickle down across these other platforms. And so it feels like at some point in time, certain people have to abdicate control to other people, whether it's AI or to the corporate overlord, Illuminati music overlords.
That's really cool. I didn't know that that existed. And Apple's always been at the forefront of music in that way. And then you're right, like maybe it's something that could be adapted in other places. And blockchain obviously fascinates me. From my perspective, it's the infinite licensing and like setting the pricing to me. And like Dowdy, you're like, people want to change things, but until you have to name how much your music costs to other people, then it's, oh, wait, like it depends. And I am a business affairs manager and I do a lot of negotiation with celebrities or music licenses. And it's a negotiation. So in the blockchain world of infinite licensing, you would be putting a lot of power into an AI to negotiate on your behalf. And back to the point of like, how much do artists need to understand about the systems? You'd be opting into something you don't totally understand, and maybe these bigger systems that do understand would be setting rates that are like taking advantage of you or getting I just think that's something, at least that's what came to mind for me. But we're
Sorry.
go ahead.
I just wanted to say that's kind of how we met, was through this like blockchain conversation. And I wanted to say that it's funny, like one of the quotes from like John Oliver is cryptocurrency is everything you don't understand about money and like mixed with everything you don't understand about computers, right? And so it's like mixing together music and blockchain and AI is by far some of the three most complex topics, right? Like you're talking about licenses and all these things. But even just hearing this being talked about, it reminds me of the DeFi space. It's like there's so much in it, but the word isn't manipulate, but you can change things if you're paying attention to it, and you can get more out of it the more that you're involved in it. And you might have this dynamic part of it, but it could be really volatile, or you could get really locked in where you're like, no, I'm just going to put everything into this token. It's going to have an 8% return rate per year, or you're going to have this really volatile part where you don't know what it's going to be. It could be really low one week, or it could be really high one week. And I think that's more what I hear when this conversation's happening. So yeah, I think that gives creators a little bit more control, though. Whether that's a good thing or not in the long run is the question. But yeah, I tremendously love the blockchain conversation because I do think that's a big part of our future for sure.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a fascinating space. And Dauda, I think you brought up a really good point. And I've been thinking about this myself about with Apple DJ, with the system they have, or even with what Spotify could have. I wonder, because they're basically controlling the royalty pool, right? So essentially, they're the ones that are deciding how it gets distributed, whether or not there's like a rate set, but the actual amount of money that flows down is essentially controlled by these large music overlords. So I don't know if there's a way to democratize that piece, or whether the royalty pool model itself is what needs to change. I agree that the way it trickles down into money on the dance floor, I think all of that's great in terms of incentivizing the whole ecosystem, but whether or not it comes out of a complete royalty pool or it's an individual rate per song or whatever, that's the edge of my knowledge on that stuff. But I just wonder if that's the right way.
I just wanted to follow up because I think, Doug, again, you made a good point with the Apple DJ. And I've been following as well when it was announced many years ago, 10 years ago, actually, there was a company called Dubset that launched. And I had wrote for a publication the launch of what was called the Mixed Transparency Report. And it was like a first step towards a chart that charted derivatives, short form remixes and long form DJ remixes. At the time I used to manage DJs and I was really interested in the space. And Dubset was really trying to do what Apple DJ is now doing, but the industry did not adopt it at scale. So when we talk about what could be done or should be done, the other layer of this is industry adoption, right? I built a company 10 years ago that had slow adoption, and now there's 20 companies like what I built 10 years ago that has better adoption. And it's market timing is a key part of this too. Market timing, industry adoption, education, and all of those sort of categories are part of how evolution progresses. Right, there's some early stage and there's some growth stage and some maturing stage. And all of these factors are all at play at each of those phases. More adoption is later in the continuum than earlier. So now you have Apple DJ 10 years after Dubset, right? And Dubset itself was 15 years after iTunes. So it's like this we're continuously see this. And that's why I think that eventually, it may not be tomorrow or even the next 5 years, but I do think it's going to be in the 2020s, because that's what I said in 2018. That in the 2020s, we will get here. Right now, we're in the middle, and we're talking about AI. and I had predicted it would be in the early 20s. But there's lots of factors that I think are really exciting to talk about. And I think we've all been talking about the business and the technology and the royalty part. And that's why I said my very first comment was I thought the most interesting conversations were between creators, listening to songwriters and lyricists battle out, because they're not talking about royalties. They're not talking about blockchain. They're not talking about crypto. They're talking about ethics, morality, and things like that. And I was on a panel. I did a panel a couple weeks ago, and I said, there's a sociological aspect to this. And if anyone knows the PESTO analysis, which one of the PESTO analysis is a macro analysis of a market, and one of the S stands for sociological, and that is the listening public has to reconcile our acceptance of authenticity in this AI music evolution. As the listening public starts to bend or move along the continuum of authenticity, it will be more acceptance and therefore more adoption by creators. While there's still resistance in the comments of any post about AI music, actual consumers don't like it if they hear about it, and some do. But as that sentiment continues to shift towards acceptance and adoption, then that's another factor at play. So all of this kind of comes together in a really exciting way.
Yeah, I think that the listeners decide for sure. And I think we've got a bit of a watershed moment this week, right? I think the #1 digital sales song on the country charts is a fully AI generated song. It's not partially, not nothing. It's completely out of the model. And so we're already here. But I think where there's a blurry line there is a lot of this still comes down to just like dilution on a factor of 1,000,000, right? I think once you're placing AI songs that to an untrained ear sound like they could be out of the professional realm of a studio or a human creator, then our brains just simply aren't evolved to disassociate what is a fully digital thing, what's a human creation, and so it all starts to sound similar. I think the listener decides the market, but at the same time, we have to grapple with whether it's a thing we want as a society to have art and music out in the way that it is. It's going to get good enough to fool people for sure. And people ask me this all the time about whether AI can imitate the magic moment of something that happens in the studio. I wouldn't discount that at some point it probably could.
I mean, we're only a few years in, and already you have Zanaya Monet being Billboard charted on the radio R&B airplay, stream charts. You have there's a AI country musician that is earning millions of streams. There's going to be resistance both from the industry and consumers. But guess what? Consumers are going to age. And my niece, who's listening to music now, who cannot tell the difference between AI artists and a real artist, is going to grow up and become in the next 10 years the music subscribers. Just like back when the electric guitar came out and you have Bob Dylan at a folk music festival using electric guitar, and consumers like, oh, this can't be a part of the folk. This is not authentic and decades have gone by, and now it's heritage. It's now heritage. What was innovation is now heritage. And that happens as we evolve. So we're going to have younger music consumers. A good friend of mine wrote a kid's book with using his dog, and he just used generative AI to make a song for the dog for the kid book within the theme of the book. Kids will eat that up. We may not like the idea, but those kids are going to grow up on this new technology, just like they're growing up on smartphones and iPads. So it may not happen tomorrow, but I assume my nieces, who are 10 and 3, they won't have any problems with AI artists in 16, 17, when they're 16, 17 years old.
I guess we'll see when it comes to music. As I always think of music as primarily a performance art, and I'm just not captivated by the idea of a robot performing an AI song on stage. But
us old folks
you're
are
right.
not.
It's not for us. It's not for us. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we're out of time, but to that point, I think like whenever I listen to music, I always want to think about the person on the other end of the song and like what they went through to make that song and all of their experiences. For me as a fan, like that's really what draws me in. But thank you guys again for this incredible conversation. Could just keep going for hours, but in the end, I don't think it's about choosing between human and machine, obviously, or between efficiency or artistry. The permission layer should not be a barrier to creativity, and I think we should design systems that make sustainable innovation possible. As a reminder, everybody who registered will receive a recording through the double helix on Substack. And thank you again for being here to help us build it together. Thank you guys so much.
Thanks, Abby. Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Bye.